Hey everybody, before I get into my talk on character revelation and the vertical movement that happens in a short story, I just want to remind everybody to keep your post, your initial post in our discussions to the 200 word maximum that I'm asking you to do. I'm doing that for two reasons. One is to look out for our workload, and two is that I think you will become a better writer if you try to make your point with fewer words. So you might initially overwrite, but I want you to try to keep your posts and sort of cut back and make sure they're not too long. Okay, first point about character in the short story. Writers who work with difficult material tend to be drawn to the short story form. And I would define difficult material as sort of working with unlikable characters, characters in crisis, characters with immense flaws, characters in violent situations, characters struggling with addiction. That difficult material, short story writers can sort of often work in shorter bursts of time when they're making stories, and they tend to complete them more quickly than, say, a novelist might complete a novel. It might take a novelist 7 years to write a novel, and it might take a short story writer like a week or a year even. And just to spend less time with sort of difficult material, it just seems like a natural human thing that we want to sort of care for ourselves. I also believe that I think that the reader also is drawn to the short story for similar reasons. Is that they can handle difficult material in shorter bursts of space, of psychic space, or of time, of real time. I don't think that Flannery O'Connor could have pulled off the ending she does in A Good Man Is Hard to Find in a novel. I really don't. I think she can pull that off in a short story. And if we were in the classroom, I'd ask you, why is that? I think you'll see some unlikable characters and sort of more volatile situations when we get into Mary Gaitskill's story collection also. I think you guys are doing a great job of writing about these characters, and I really applaud you. But I want to remind everybody that we must describe characters and not judge characters. Let's remember, it is not an author's job to make a likable character. It is an author's job to make a complex character, to fill his or her work with revelation. That is, revelation of a character's consciousness, so that we can see the way a character thinks and the way a character perceives the world. We can see their inconsistent consistencies, their contradictions. Some of our most unlikable characters are also our most famous characters, like Humbert Humbert in Lolita, the grandmother in Flannery O'Connor's short story A Good Man Is Hard to Find, Flaubert's Madame Bovary. So on the surface of things, it appears that a short story and also a novel, that they have a lot that they move horizontally. And yes, there are sort of horizontal elements in the short story, which I point out using a sort of blue pen in this thing. You can take a look at it. But like the plot, right? A time and space seem to move in a kind of a linear or horizontal way. And yet the short story also has vertical movement. And that vertical movement can be described as the revelation of character complexity. That is, as the story passes through time and space, and as the surface of the story, that is the scene, the dramatic moment, externalizes a character's inner conflict, the story comes to reveal more and more of what makes a character tick. So as we sort of get deeper and deeper into the story, into the situation, and into the dramatic moment. As the conflict seems to advance and heighten, we come to know that character more and more. In Charles Baxter's The Art of Subtext, which is not an assigned reading, but we are reading Charles Baxter, he explains about the tension between what a character wants and what a character gets, and her reaction to that. And that by the end of the story, as a situation unfolds and unfolds, and we come to know that character more and more, that their sort of expressions of fear, their fears and their desires become this sort of what he calls like congestion of subtext. And I wanted to point out just two moments. One is in A Good Man Is Hard to Find, where we really feel that vertical movement. We come to know the protagonist of the story better. So the first one is in A Good Man is Hard to Find, by the way, the story moves vertically all the way through the story. But I wanted to just point out this moment. This is on page 29, right at the end of the story. For the most part, the grandmother has just been this really selfish, manipulative character. Yet she also wants to be with her family. She wants to dance with her son, and she wants to show her grandchildren some of the beautiful sights, right? So she is a complex character. But at the very end of the story, amidst this really violent situation, as she bears witness to her son's death, as she bears witness to her son's wife and her grandchildren, this is what happens. This is on page 29. The Misfits talking about wish she'd seen the crucifixion. I wasn't there, so I can't say he didn't, the Misfit said. I wish I had been there, he said, hitting the ground with his feet. It ain't right I wasn't there, because if I had been there, I would have known. Listen, lady, he said in a high voice, if I had been there, I would have known, and I wouldn't be like I am now. His voice seemed about to crack, and the grandmother's head cleared for an instant, and she saw the man's face twisted close to her own as if he were going to cry, and she murmured, Why, you're one of my babies, you're one of my children. She reached out and touched him on the shoulder. The Misfit sprang back as if a snake had bitten him and shot her 3 times through the chest. So in the presence of the Misfit's revelation, in the presence of his desire, his sort of openness to tell her his own thoughts about the crucifixion, sort of the Misfit's theology, and in the face of this violent man, she reaches out to him and she says, You are one of my babies. That is the vertical movement that I'm talking about. This moment where all of a sudden she has become something other. We know her better than we knew her the moment before. There's a great example of this vertical movement in the short story by Charles Baxter called Loyalty, and that's for your reading this week. And if you remember the narrator, he is loyal to both his first wife, Corinne, and his now wife, Astrid. And after many years, Corinne shows up, and he goes and picks her up at the train station. He doesn't tell his wife or his current wife or his family, including Corinne's son, that this is happening. And his sense of loyalty for Corinne, his ex-wife, and his sense of loyalty to his existing wife is revealed in this amazing moment when he walks Corinne into the house. In the kitchen, Astrid has been sprinkling seasoning onto some salmon when she glances up and sees Corinne, who looks worse than she did a few minutes ago because of the kitchen's overhead light. This is on page 35, by the way. First, Astrid looks at Corinne. Then she looks at me. Then she looks at Corinne again. Expressions pass across her face so quickly that you might think you hadn't seen the previous one before the next one appears. First, she's confused. Her eyebrows rise up. Who's that? Then she's in full recognition mode. Her mouth opens slightly, though she says nothing. Her tongue licks her upper lip. Then it's time for pity and compassion, and her eyes start to water. Then she's shocked, and her hand with lemon juice on it rises to her face. Ugh, she says, but nothing else comes out. A little spot of seasoning stays on her cheek. Then she's angry, and that's when she looks at me, as if I were the cause of all this. But the anger doesn't stay posted up there on her face for long. It's displaced by an expression we don't have a word for. You see this expression when someone is hit by circumstances that are much bigger than expected. The person is trying to restore things to normal, which can't be done. Actors can't duplicate this look. It only happens in real life. Hello? So we get this beautifully expansive passage of the narrator looking very closely at his current wife's face and all its sort of various stages of emotion, confusion and anger. And his own loyalty to his present wife is revealed in that sort of very close way that he details her face. With his fears, right? With his fears that he has hurt her and he has done something wrong. So his sense of loyalty for all human beings is deepened in that moment. We feel it as a passage where we feel the story not sort of moving horizontally, but we feel it deepening. We feel it moving vertically. Charles Baxter, the writer of the story, says in a different book about this. He says about writing about faces. The problem of seeing a face, of acknowledging its reality, its connection to a human being who has a separate identity from ours, leads to the problem of obligation, which makes many people uncomfortable. Obligations are often unpleasant and difficult to discharge. This is a point made repeatedly by the French philosopher Emmanuel Levinas in his Meditations on the Face. If I understand him correctly, Levinas argues that the face is the unique physical presence that provokes the subject's obligations to the other. So we see the narrator's obligations to his wife, his loyalty to his wife being expressed in this moment. The story moves vertically. All right, people, this has been a long lecture. We're at 13 minutes and 45 seconds. Vertical movement. Vertical movement. Have a good day.